Welcome back everybody to another video. In this video I'm here with this 2003 Honda Civic, and we're going to do cam seal, crank seal, timing belt, water pump. And so if you need any of that stuff, watch this video. I'll get you the steps so you can get through it, not have to pay anybody. Step 1, pop your hood. Disconnect the battery. That way when we move the alternator out of the way, we don't have the positive terminal alternator short out and cause problems. Next, we're going to take the driver wheel off so that we can get into the belt area here. We have two belts, power steering belt, and then an alternator air conditioning pump, belt. To get the alternator loose, down here you have a 12 millimeter. You got to loosen that one just enough so that the alternator will slide. Come over here, loosen up this bolt that comes through. It's just like a wing nut setup. Loosen it so that's apart. Then we need to loosen one more bolt from above in order to let the alternator move freely. We need to get the power steering pump belt loose. You have one 12 millimeter bolt here. You just need to loosen this a few threads. And then you have another one. It's hard to see, but it's right at the bottom of this bracket. Yeah, this is already loose, so I could take it off. You see that bolt right there? That's another 12 millimeter you need to loosen up. Then you come over here, loosen this wing nut, and then I used a rubber mallet to tap this, and it went down. That way the belt's loose and you can pop the belt off. You're going to need this Honda crank pulley tool. This holds the center of the crank while you put your socket inside to take the bolt out. Part number is 57279. Put the tool inside, take a breaker bar, slide it through the control arm, then take a big wrench with a 19 millimeter, and you're going to have to use all your might to break the bolt loose. Then once the bolt's broken loose, you can use your rat-a-tat gun and just pull it out the rest of the way. Just slide the crankshaft balancer off. Now we're going to go around all these 10 millimeter bolts here, there, all the way around to the top. So we're gonna have to get above the vehicle as well to get any 10 millimeter bolts that are holding the timing cover on. There's also one right here that is a 12 or a 13 millimeter. And there's this wiring harness here that goes to a cam and crank sensor. So you pop this rubber out, then you can get to the clip. You push the little clip and pull out the connector, and then disconnect the connector at the bottom, which I already did, and then you push these guys off to the side so they're not in your way. The valve cover overlaps the timing cover here, which sucks, because now that means I need to loosen up the valve cover, lift it probably 1/8 of an inch in order to clear. Then we have this hose here is going to be in our way, the power steering hose. So that's on a bracket there, but you can just pull it out of this bracket and sort of slide it out of your way in order to pull the timing cover out of this hole right here. I ended up having to take the coils out and the bolts for the harness so I could get to this one here, and then I cracked it so I could lift it up just like a little 1/8 of an inch. Then this lip slid out from underneath this groove. We have enough motor mounts to hold everything so the motor's not going to fall out. So we're going to take, with a 17 millimeter deep socket, the 3 nuts that hold this front mount on here. I'm using a skinny flathead to find top dead center. That also will in turn should match up with the mark on the cam shaft sprocket that says up, which then also in turn should match the marking down on the crank. I'm just going to go through and make sure all the timing marks line up before I do anything with popping the timing off. This screwdriver is now pushed all the way up. This guy says up on this housing side. There's an arrow. There's an arrow right here that this line needs to line up perfectly with the arrow. Use a 10mm socket to remove the crank position sensor. That makes it easier to see the timing mark for the crank sprocket, and it obviously gives you room to take the belt on and put the belt off, put the belt on, take the belt off. I don't know English. We want to break the cam pulley bolt loose before we take the timing belt off, because we want the timing belt and the crank pulley bolt to be able to hold it while we pop this loose. So this is a 12mm, so you can use a 12mm wrench, socket, whatever you want, and just snap that loose. And once it's loose, then we can proceed to take the timing belt off. Just so I don't mess this up, I'm going a little bit out of, extra. So I marked the top there, I marked the two marks on the side to the belt, and then I came down to the crank. I marked the crank there, the belt there, the crank here, and the belt right behind it as well. So when I pull it off, I'm gonna line up the new belt, mark the new belt, to just verify I'm not off one tooth or something stupid. Next step is to loosen this tensioner. So that's a 14mm. And once we loosen that, we can move the tensioner to where we can pop the belt off. There's a tab on the tensioner here. I pushed up on the tab, it pulled the tensioner away, loosened up the belt, and then I popped the belt off of the tensioner, and then everything else here is pretty easy to get it apart. You can't get the belt out without taking this metal piece here off. So you take the power steering all the way out by taking that T-bolt set up here out, and the one that goes through the bottom out. Those are both 12mm. And now we're in here, we can get to 1, 2, 3 bolts here, and we're gonna have to disconnect this 10mm here and loosen this one here so that this bracket isn't touching this huge metal bracket, as well as this small 8mm here that holds the wiring to this big bracket. Then we're done here. All we got to do now is go below and get the bolts below that are bolted through here into the front of the block, which requires you to pull the alternator all the way out. So just go ahead, pull the alternator all the way out. You're gonna have to take this bolt out, which goes to the bottom, and then there's a bolt on top that will hold it from the top, and then you can pull the alternator over towards the radiator and just let it hang there. Then this bracket will just pull out, and we'll have full access to getting the timing belt all the way out. At the same time, we might as well right now disconnect this cam bolt, pull the cam out, because we're changing the seals. So we need these out of the way in order to change the seals, obviously. Now you can see the single piece, so we have to take the alternator out. We're going to slide the alternator towards the radiator once we get this bolt out. That will allow us to get to all the bolts that are mounted from this bracket to the block. You got two 14mm bolts right here. There's also a 14mm right under the header. There's a 14mm here and here. There's two. We need to take those out, and then this piece will be able to be removed. Slide off the crank sprocket, put it off to the side, and you have this ring here. Now this ring here doesn't have a key or anything, but it's like frisbee shaped, so it's concaved, and the concave part was facing the engine, so it curls like around the seal, I guess, and that's the way we're going to put it back on. Actually, I'm going to stack them in the orientation they were. Use a 10mm to pull this bolt out, and use a 10mm to pull out the bolt that holds the sensor. That way you can get this out of the way. And now we have full access to the cam seal here and the water pump bolt top. The one way up here was blocked by the cover. The water pump's held in with a bunch of 10mm bolts. So we're gonna drain the radiator fluid right here from the radiator. We're gonna drain that into our bucket, and then we will come over here, take all those 10mm bolts out, and pop the water pump out of the car. Here is the kit for the front crank seal, TCS 45904. And then the water pump kit, which has water pump, timing belt, tensioner, all that, is TCK WP312. I learned this trick from an old hillbilly like 15-20 years ago. When you can't get in there with a puller, you put wood screws through it. It pushes on the metal behind it, and it pulls it right out. So now I can get the new gasket and just stuff it in there. Get brake cleaner, clean it all off. You see right there, I took a black Sharpie and I marked that arrow to make it easier to see when I'm trying to line up everything again and verify the timing is set correctly. So I would suggest doing that too. Next step you want to do is find a socket that's pretty much identical size of this seal. So in this case, this is 34mm. I'm going to use this in a rubber mallet to tap this guy in. Before I tap it in though, you want to put wheel bearing grease here on the inside, and then you want to shimmy it on by hand first so you don't rip this, because then it'll just leak and you'll be doing the whole job over again. Pop your water pump out, and it's going to drip for a while, so I'm going to go eat lunch while it's dripping, and I jammed a rag here just that way that there's not antifreeze all over the front of the motor and everywhere. I'm already going to have to clean all this. So then once it's done dripping and I get back from lunch, I'm going to put the new water pump on, which is over here. New water pump's all nice and shiny. Comes with an O-ring that sits in the groove, like so. I'm also just going to take a thin amount of right stuff, and I'm just going to go on the outside of the O-ring, so in between the O-ring and the outside of the body here, I'm just going to put a thin layer, and we should be good. It's just sort of overkill, but I don't like having to do warranty work for people. If I do it once, I want it to not come back for the same thing unless they're paying me. As my double precaution, just to verify everything is going to be good, I have moved my markings from the old belt to the new belt all the way around. Took my time with it, did it slowly here, like so, like so. Just as like an extra precaution. You don't have to do this. If you have the markings lined up on the motor, then you're fine. I do this because I don't want to do this job twice. We're going to do the same trick we did on the crank right here on the cam. to get this guy out, and then we'll put the new cam seal in. The camshaft seal is a Timken 320595. Start putting everything together. Do not try torquing this cam bolt right now because it's not connected to the crank and it will spin and it will cause you problems. Leave it alone. Just put it in. If you have an impact, you can hit it a little bit, the electric impact, tighten it up. So put in, leave that pin in there like that. You got the spring here. You put the new spring, new thing. Put this in, leave this bolt that holds the tensioner a little bit loose for now. We need to do 2 full rotations with the belt on to verify everything's good before we pull that pin. Now I'm going to go down there, put the crank sprocket. I'm going to grab the belt. I'm going to put the belt on here, and I'm going to put zip ties around here to hold the belt in the correct position, because while I'm down there, the belt can move up here. While I'm up here, the belt can move down there. So what I'm going to do is zip tie the belt at the top and on the sides. So I know for a fact it never moved or skipped a tooth or anything up here. Now I have this all tied up here. I have it around the water pump, but the water pump should be able to spin freely, which is what we want. And now I'm going to go down there and put the crank sprocket on. The black arrow is facing this line right here on the crank pulley, so that's good. And that mark there is lined up with that mark there, and that mark there is lined up with that mark there. So it's just like a triple check for me, right? I'm going to go on top. I'm going to cut those zip ties on the cam. This here is loose, right? I had to pry up on that guy there, this where the spring goes in, to rotate this so I could even get the belt on. The belt should be tight enough where you can just barely turn it 90 degrees on the long side. Make sure you're still lined up here, which you should be if you use the zip ties. Make sure, let me get some more light. Make sure the timing belt is on this side of the groove. You don't want it on this thick outside part. You want it on the inside. And make sure it looks seated all the way everywhere you look. Leave that pin in the tensioner right now, and let's turn it over 2 times. This up is faced back up. These lines are on the side again, and this one is straight up. Everything looked good here. We go down to the bottom, and it looks like the mark lines up with the arrow, so we're good. I'm gonna put a little pressure on the tensioner, and then I'm gonna tighten the tensioner down for good and pull the pin. So I'm just gonna grab a little baby pry bar, just give it a little snug, see if it'll go any more, and then I will tighten this down with a 14. And once this is tightened down, then we can yank out this pin. At this point, your timing's set, and it's all just a matter of putting it back together. Putting all the covers and all the brackets and the alternator and power steering pump back in its place. So I'm not going to go through all that. This was just to help you get the timing set and make sure you don't shred your engine. Nobody wants to pull out their motor because of bent valves. So hopefully this video helps you out. If you like the video, hit like, share, subscribe. Hit me up on Patreon if you want for $1 a month. Till next time, wrench on.